Hello, we're almost ready to go here. Another 5 minutes. I put some links in the chat. It might be helpful to follow along if you load up the first one. I made a little chart of the cognitive series, just to make it easier to follow along. The other one is a reading, an academic article by uh, Rupert Gethin, who's one of the, I think he's one of the best contemporary writers on Buddhism. Greetings, Hua. Hope you're doing well. A few more minutes, we'll start. Just wait for the bell and see how many more people pop in. Evening, Ted. Oh, Jeff and Jaya. Yeah, good to hear from you. I enjoyed my visit out there. Okay. Miroslav, Jay. Evening, Jay. Another couple of minutes.
It's 6 o'clock.
Okay, let's start. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so this evening we're going to continue along with our study of Abhidhamma, and I want to deal with the process of consciousness, the chitta vritti, today, and also cover the topic of the bhavaṅga consciousness because the two are very related. Uh, we've seen in previous talks, we've seen that consciousness or chitta can be classified in various ways. This is looking at it from another angle, not in terms so much of the type or modality of consciousness, but its functional operation in a sequence. It's the Abhidhamma's explanation of how we actually cognize an object. And there's a lot of complexity to this picture, a lot of variations and so on. Um, I won't be able to get into all of it today, but to give you a general overview, whenever we contact an object with the senses, and we'll start with, there's two slightly different processes involved, whether it's a physical object or a mental object. But we'll start with the case of a physical object. If you see something with the eye or hear something with the ear, etc., then for a full cognition of that object, it requires 17 mind moments. And one of the complications is that it doesn't always occur to the full 17. We only go through 17 mind moments if the object impinges very strongly on the senses. And that's not so much related to the vividness of the external object, but to the keenness of the sense impression. So if you're really closely paying attention to something, even a rather dull and uninspiring object can give you a full act of cognition. And if you're not fully engaged with the object, then the process is cut short at one point or another and doesn't reach the full 17 mind moments. And this occurs when this sequence begins when an object impinges on the senses and stirs the mind out of what is called bhavaṅga. And I'll talk much more about bhavaṅga later. But for now, let's just say bhavaṅga is the state of mind when it's not actively engaged. It's like I call it the mind idling in neutral. And this occurs continuously throughout deep sleep, and it occurs during the day between moments of cognition. The mind keeps subsiding back into bhavaṅga. It's like idling and waiting for the object to arise. So when an object impinges on the sense doors, the first thing that happens is that the bhavaṅga vibrates. It's disturbed. There's a disturbance in the bhavaṅga. The resting state of mind is vibrating. As the Pali is chalana, which means like exactly vibrating. And then after 2 moments of that, the third moment, the bhavaṅga is stopped. The Pali for that is upacheda. It's cut off. And then you emerge from bhavaṅga and you begin the processing of the sense information. And the first moment is sense door averting. The mind averts to or inclines, pays attention to whatever sense door is demanding attention, whether it's eye, ear, nose, tongue, body. And then the averting to the object is followed by 3 moments of processing, which are called before the processing, there's the actual moment of consciousness, of eye consciousness or nose consciousness, whatever, and that's the moment when contact occurs, sense object, consciousness, and sense organ. So this is the actual moment of sense impingement, and it said that there's no knowledge at this point. There's just experience. So the way it's explained is, if you're seeing a blue object, the eye consciousness at this stage knows blue, but it does not yet know this is blue. You see the difference? It sees blue, but it does not know this is blue. So it's just a raw experience. Then there's the 3 moments of processing that are called receiving, investigating, and determining. So it's increasingly refined. The sense impression is received, then it's investigated, then it's determined. So now we know this is blue. There then follows 7 moments of jhana consciousness. That's a difficult term to translate. Sometimes it's translated as impulsion. The literal meaning of the word is to run quickly. What this constitutes is the active phase of consciousness. This is the other phases so far have been resultant. You remember the distinction between resultant and effective, or Kamma, making. So jhana is the phase in which Kamma is made, when there's what we could call loosely free will, when there's the being has some activity at this point. It's dealing with the object on a different way. It's processing it in a sense from this active side. And at the end of the jhanas, then there are 2 moments of registration consciousness, that is tad aramana, which is the mind essentially putting away the object. It's taking the object and holding it for 2 successive mind moments, and that one of the functions of that is like putting it in memory storage. Then after tadaramana, the mind subsides back into the bhavaṅga. So there's this 17 mind moments. To recap, the bhavaṅga vibrates, then it's stopped. Then the mind averts to one of the sense doors. Then it has the actual experience of the sense impression. Then it processes it through receiving, investigating, and determining. Then it deals with it by making Kamma through 7 jhana moments. Then it registers it for 2 moments. And that constitutes one act of cognition. And this happens extremely rapidly. A mind moment is extremely brief, a tiny, tiny fraction of a second. So this is happening very rapidly. again and again to constitute a full experience. Well, we couldn't normally access in our ordinary mind a single moment, but we see a kind of a broad brush of many, many successive moments. In the case of a mind object, like a thought or a memory, the process is somewhat simpler. It starts the same way. The bhavaṅga is vibrated for 2 moments, then arrested. Then there's a mind door adverting moment. The mind adverts to the mental object. But then there's no processing involved. You go straight into the jhanas and then the registration. And the mind door process occurs either on a purely mental object, such as a thought, a memory, an idea, or it can occur subsequent to a sense impression. And it's the usual course after a sense impression is for the mind to process it further by taking the sense object as a mental object and processing it further. And in both of these cases I've spoken of, the mind is going through the full sequence. But as I alluded to, this doesn't always occur. If you're not very keen, if you're not very mindful, then the process stops. And it can stop at various places. It either stops before the jhanas, or it stops after the jhanas, but before tadaramana. So something that's not fully cognized, it's not fully taken on, it's a kind of semi-conscious action. And one of the kind of practical applications that I think this tells us is that if we're mindful, we're going to remember. There's a strong connection between sati and memory. And this is an application in terms of Abhidhamma. So, for example, if you find yourself always losing your car keys or your pen or something, where did I put that damn thing? The reason is because when you put it down in the first place, you weren't being mindful. So the cognitive sequence aborted before it got to tadaramana, and the act was not registered. If you're fully mindful when you put it down, then you don't have to make an effort to remember it and keeps telling yourself, oh, my car keys are on the dresser, my car keys are on the dresser. You can then put it out of your mind and go about your business. And then when next time you need them, you easily recover that information because it's been registered. And we experience these sequences of consciousness continually throughout the day. And in between moments of consciousness, we relapse into bhavaṅga. And that bhavaṅga is a very important concept. And it's sometimes misunderstood. Well, it's used, I would first of all remark that it's used in a technical sense here in Abhidhamma. It's used in a much looser sense in some of the Thai forest tradition, talking about meditation. They talk about bhavaṅga as a kind of dull state of the mind sinking into sloth and torpor. But that's a very loose sense. It's not the technical meaning of bhavaṅga in the Abhidhamma. So we're going to confine ourselves to that application of the word. Bhavaṅga is the basic consciousness, and it's really not translatable. Sometimes you see it translated as life continuum consciousness, because the bhava in bhavaṅga is bhava, becoming, being. So it has this this function of being the sort of the continuing thread that in the consciousness of a being. When the mind is not doing anything else, it reverts to this state of bhavaṅga. But it's not to be thought of as unconsciousness or subconsciousness. Those are sometimes referred to in those terms by modern writers, and it seems to be a bit of a misunderstanding. I referenced in the chat a really good article, academic article on bhavaṅga by Rupert Gethin. Unfortunately, people who are seeing this later won't see that reference. But if you do a Google search for bhavaṅga and rebirth by Rupert Gethin, you'll find the article. Bhavaṅga is a class as a resultant consciousness, so there's no choice or volition involved at the moment of its occurrence. When we're in deep sleep, like dreamless sleep, it's a continual stream of bhavaṅga moments. And otherwise, during the day, we're in and out of bhavaṅga, in between moments of perception. Bhavaṅga is not an unconscious state. It's just that we don't remember when we're not in bhavaṅga. We don't remember it. Bhavaṅga consciousness does take an object, and this is a very important detail. In the Theravada Abhidhamma, consciousness always takes an object. It makes no sense to talk of consciousness without an object. Consciousness, remember, is not a thing, it's an act. It's an act of cognizing. And it has to be cognizing something. So the question is, what does bhavaṅga cognize? And this is also why it's known as life continuum consciousness, because it's the link between, it serves, one of its functions, it serves as the link between lifetimes. The bhavaṅga that a being experiences throughout the course of a lifespan is always on the same object. And that object was determined by the last series of jhana moments in the previous lifetime. When a being is dying, the last cognitive series will take as its object either as a limited range of possibilities. It takes either Kamma, sign of Kamma, or sign of destiny. Kamma means it remembers some action done during the life. And that will usually be something that was heavy or significant, some weighty concern. Although it might be something done very recently or even something done at that moment. For example, if the dying person hears a sound or smells an odor, that might color that moment. But usually it's a remembrance of some action done in the life. Sign of Kamma is related to that. It's a variation on that. It's instead of remembering the action, you recall, you get some sort of image or sign of the quality of the Kamma made. And sign of, so those are both past or possibly present, but usually past reference sign of destiny, the mind jumps forward and has a vision of the next life. So in any case, that becomes fixed at the moment of death as the bhavaṅga for the next lifetime. And the being in the next lifetime has that same bhavaṅga continually throughout life, which accounts for what is thought of as inherent character in beings, because you're many, many times a day, although you don't remember it normally, because bhavaṅga consciousness doesn't register, you fall back into bhavaṅga and you experience this sign that is the characteristic sign of this life. And that was determined in the past life. The good news is that I'm assuming, maybe I'm making assumptions here, but I'm assuming that everyone listening to this discourse is existing in the human realm at present. If you are in a human body, then your death moments were alighting on a wholesome consciousness, something karmically positive. If your mind averts at that time to something unwholesome, to an evil deed, then you would have been reborn in one of the lower realms. The human realm, the Deva realm, the Brahma realm are considered fortunate births, and the animal realm, the Peta realm, and the Hell realm are unfortunate births. And the destination one goes to is determined, according to Abhidhamma, on a technical level, it's determined at the death moment by what object the Jawan is run over and process, and that creates the Kamma for the sign that is taken by the bhavaṅga consciousness. So the bhavaṅga consciousness is not to be thought of as a blank slate or a dull darkness. It's a resting state of mind, and it falls into the awareness of the sign that is the particular sign of that lifetime. So this provides a link between lifetimes. In the dependent origination, we have, because of Sankara's vijnana, and the vijnana is glossed as patisandhi vijnana, meaning because of formations, past karma, we have rebirth linking consciousness. And the Abhidhamma explains it down to this technical level of saying the last jhana moments determine the bhavana, the bhavaṅga. So this is the characteristic of Abhidhamma, to take concepts that are introduced in the suttas and explain them at a very much more technical, minute level. So our lives are divided between bhavaṅga and chittavitti. We're going back and forth continually between these two modes of existence. Our active existence, what we're experiencing and doing, and everything we remember, that's chittavitti. That's the process of consciousness. And bhavaṅga is the resting state of mind, the in-between moments when the mind is not taking an object. And this is happening continually and very rapidly. The actual duration of a mind moment is not specified anywhere in the ancient texts. I have seen Burmese writings that try and quantify it, but I think that's kind of very speculative. But it's certainly many, probably many thousands of mind moments in a second, in the blink of an eye. So we can't really get down to a single mind moment. What we experience is a broad brush sequence, and it's the sense process followed by the mind process, which is processing that information, and which gives us our picture of the world. We build up a picture of the world through these complex processes. There was debates amongst the early schools of Buddhism about exactly how this works. They generally all agreed pretty closely on the process, but there were debates about the fine points. One of the controversies surrounded the difficulty of explaining how we're aware of anything when both mind and matter are impermanent, and one is constantly, both of them are constantly flashing in and out of existence. The Theravada answer to this is that the rate of impermanence of mind is 17 times faster than that of matter. So a single occurrence of a material object that we experience with our senses lasts long enough for the mind to go through these 17 mind moments and have a full active cognition. There also was discussion about whether there is direct perception of objects, whether we're actually experiencing objects, or an indirect perception. And I think that the Theravada view generally is that there's an indirect perception, that we don't ever really experience the outside world. What we experience is our mental reconstruction of it. That the only moment of direct perception is the moment of the sense door consciousness, like the eye consciousness seeing blue, but it doesn't even know it is blue. It just knows blue. And then that's processed and received, investigated, and determined, and then run over with the jhavanas, and then the resultant is put away with tadaramana, and then the mind process works it over, which includes the faculty of perception as the cetasika that arises with the chittas. So in the end, what we experience is not the world, but our mental simulation of the world. And if our sense organs are in good order, and if our mental faculties are well ordered, then our simulation of the world will be fairly accurate and allow us to function in the world and manipulate the world. but it's not the world. It's our mental reconstruction or image of the world. And a great deal of the time, according to this model, we're not even engaged with the world at all. Our consciousness is solely engaged with the sign of the bhavaṅga consciousness. So that's a brief overview of the Chittavritti, which is the process of consciousness, how it functions, how it works, and of the bhavaṅga, its relation to bhavaṅga, and the relation of bhavaṅga to rebirth. So I think I'm going to stop there, even though it's a bit short. I don't really want to just keep filling up space with for no point. I've covered everything I wanted to, and I'll look now at the chat and see if there's any questions. We do have one already. I'll read it out. Venerable Sir, does the notion of bhavaṅga at the moment of death not defy the law of Kamma? How could rebirth depend on a single moment? What is significant? What is the significance of merit then? Well, that single moment is dependent on your entire life. And this isn't like an easy out. You can't live a heedless, wicked life and then, as you're on the deathbed, think good thoughts and get a good rebirth, because you're conditioning your mind all the time, and the power of habitual kamma is very strong. There are different classes of kamma, and the strongest is a weighty kamma, meaning is something of very great significance, either for good or ill, that was done, that may come to the mind. So if you've done some horrendous deed in your life, it's likely to haunt you at your deathbed. You won't escape it. And another almost as powerful influence is habitual kamma. If something is repeated and done over and over, it becomes habit forming in the mind. So you have to remember that at the moment of death, you're not exactly in your best condition to control what's happening, and the mind is going to naturally gravitate towards what it's habituated to. An arhat must have a unique type of bhavaṅga persisting for remainder of his life that results in no rebirth. And an anagami must have another type that is suitable only to heavenly realms or higher. Well, first of all, the case of an arhat, he would still, until the moment of his death, he would still have the same bhavaṅga that he's had all his life. That's bhavaṅga stays fixed throughout a lifetime, but he wouldn't generate a new bhavaṅga, so he would take no rebirth. An anagami, on the other hand, has overcome most of his defilements, so his bhavaṅga is going to be quite pure, and this leads to rebirth in the Pure Land. Let's see. As questions are coming very quick, I'm going to have to backtrack here. Is it correct to assume that everything that cognizant is part of bhavaṅga consciousness? No. Everything that we cognize is part of the cognitive sequence. Bhavaṅga is not aware of the outside world at all. So when we're in bhavaṅga, we're not aware of the outside world, but when we're in the process consciousness, we can be aware of our own minds and thoughts, or we can be aware of the outside world. So it's two separate ways of being. Okay, now this is a third part to the previous question. Is it accurate then to characterize the moment of stream entries as being first tape of this type of bhavaṅga since time immemorial, that being across all previous existence? No, I don't think so. I don't think stream entry or even arahantship would change the bhavaṅga. The bhavaṅga is determined by the previous lifetime. Is rebirth only relevant to the physical death of the body or also on a momentary basis? Um, well, it's generally we're referring to the physical death of the body, but you could use it in a more general, less technically precise sense to talk about uh, death and rebirth on a momentary level. Like at each moment, consciousness is falling away and then re-arising. And the dependent origination also applies on that time scale. So in the sutta where the warrior asked the Buddha where someone who dies is reborn, that would apply to this. The state of battle warrior is a specific bhavaṅga. Well, he's making, see how this would work. The sutta he's referring to is uh, there's a pair of suttas in the Samyutta Nikaya back to back, short suttas where somebody asked the Buddha about uh, their expected rebirth. The first one is an actor. He says, it's been passed down in our Actors Guild that when we die, we go to the dewa of the heaven of the laughing dewas because we amuse people so much. And the Buddha is silent, but he always answers on the third question. So the third time the guy asks the same question, the Buddha says, no, for leading beings into delusion, you're going to the hell of the laughing demons. And then the second one follows a similar pattern. It's a warrior says in our warriors guild it's been passed down that when we die we'll go to the warriors heaven. And the Buddha is silent for 3 times and he says no, because of all the acts of killing you've performed, you're going to re-arise in a hell of hacking and stabbing. So what this would, in terms of the Abhidhamma that we're discussing today, how this would work is someone who has led a very violent life with a lot of fighting and murderous acts, that would become a habitual kamma to them. You know, it becomes very fixed in their consciousness. So at the moment of death, they're likely to allude in their mind to remember those acts, and that will color their jhana moments, and the jhana moments determine the bhavaṅga for the next life. So if it's violence and swords and hacking, then that leads to a hellish rebirth. But that's a sign of destiny for a hellish rebirth. Next question. I feel like one gets distracted through the senses and then we get lost in samsara. We lose our memory and it might take us a long time to remember again to be present. Would you agree with this statement? Yes, that's true. We get distracted through the senses. That's the nature of being in this realm, with the sense desire realm, where we're constantly infatuated by sense objects, and then we fall into either desire or fear of unpleasant objects and desire for pleasant ones, and that ends up keeping the mind busy with at this sense desire level. That's one of the main advantages for doing jhana meditation, because then you get at least a kind of temporary respite from sense realm consciousness, and you experience a higher consciousness that's not based on the senses. And then you can develop some degree of detachment just from the senses because you've seen an alternative. Is enlightenment a continuous awareness of the process of cognition in details? Um, there's actually a specific, and I'm keeping this discussion in terms of what we're talking about, the Abhidhamma explanations of things. There is actually a specific sequence, cognitive series relevant to attaining the stream that the mind goes through a series of jhanas, one of which is called change of lineage, Gotrabu, which opens the mind to a different reality, and then the mind experiences nibbana. There are, in the text, there are details of the specific sequences for the mind entering jhana, the mind entering one of the stages of enlightenment, and so on. There are variations on the same sequence. The continuous process of cognition, by making the mind more conscious, though, that does lead to towards liberation. That's the whole idea of Vipassana meditation, is making the sequence of cognition conscious. Then you can begin to detach from it. Next question. Sloth and torpor is my main hindrance. What habit of mind reinforces this? How can I combat this, especially during meditation? You need to, the sloth and torpor is very difficult because it's sort of self-reinforcing. It becomes a downward spiral. You have to really take vigorous effort to break it. You have to apply energy to get energy, and not surrender to it, not to succumb to it, but to fight against it. In terms of meditation, the first thing is posture, to make sure you're not slouching, you're sitting straight. And then you can take further measures like meditating with eyes open, even though that adds to the distraction factor. It lets light into your being, and that can help to wake you up. You might also do more walking meditation. There are many different things you can do to try and shake yourself awake. I'm going to have to back this up again. These questions are coming in fast and furious today. Greetings, Bhante. Is the transient states of Gandhava considered another rebirth? That's a big topic, and there's no definitive answer on that. It's a big mystery exactly what is meant by the Gandhava, the being seeking rebirth. In the Majjhima Nikaya, the description of the very summary description of the rebirth process is that it occurs when three things come together: the seed of the father, the blood of the mother in her time, and the Gandhava seeking rebirth. And there's no explanation of what's meant by a Gandhava here. The Abhidhamma doesn't mention Gandhavas at all. According to the Abhidhamma sequence, the death moment is immediately followed by the birth moment. There are different theories about this. Whole books have been written discussing this issue. Okay, next question. Would you consider giving guided meditation sessions to lead us through the 17 step moments? No, I don't think that's possible to do. They happen so quickly, you're not going to be able to really track them. If one reacts with equanimity at the moment of death towards both good and bad deeds, alike pleasant and unpleasant, where would one be reborn? Well, that's I don't think that question is really fair or accurate, because we're talking about the mind taking a single object at death. It's not going to have the whole sequence of the life presenting itself in one moment. But if you have equanimity, that would definitely be a positive factor. If you've got sadness and regret, that's a strong negative factor. Another question: how would Anantarika Papa karma impact the last mind moment? Those are the five weighty kammas. There, it's said that there are five actions that are so heinous, they're so weighty, that they're sure to result in a lower rebirth. And that is killing your mother, killing your father, killing an arahant, wounding a Buddha, or creating a schism in the Sangha. Any of those five, if they're done at any time during the life, they're so heavy and grievous that they're sure to influence the subsequent lifetime. So they fall under the category of weighty kamma. Could the ox duty and dog duty ascetic purposely pick that, or similar to purposely change bhavangas unskillfully? In a way, they are reflecting the benefit of their human. They are neglecting the benefit of their human birth big time. For those who aren't aware, the ox duty and dog duty ascetic. This is another example from the suttas, that there were ascetics in India who did all sorts of weird, crazy things, and some of them deliberately lived like animals. So the dog duty ascetic, went about on all fours and ate his food off the ground. Just he lived as closely as he could to being a dog, and he thought by doing this he would become an arahant. And the Buddha told him, you'll just be reborn as a dog among dogs. And this makes perfect sense in terms of this theory or this system of the conditioning of the mind by habitual kamma, that the sign of his next life will be a dog, because he spent his whole life obsessed with being a dog. So it seems quite straightforward. If bhavaṅga remains unchanged during a lifetime, the last bhavaṅga projects one's next rebirth, and this unchanging, unchangeable aspect of life stream seems to defy anicca. I think you've got a slight misunderstanding there, that the bhavaṅga is the same throughout one lifetime. And then at the very last sequence in that lifetime, the new bhavaṅga is created. So there is a linkage from lifetime to lifetime of cause and effect that functions through the setting of the bhavaṅga for the next life in the previous life. But the bhavaṅga changes from lifetime to lifetime. It's not the same. It remains the same throughout the course of one lifetime. And it's also impermanent, but even then it's impermanent in that it rises and falls continually, but it always on the same object. What would be the Abhidhamma explanation on experiencing by a newborn baby? Well, the newborn baby would not have, generally, unless except in very exceptional circumstances, would not have any conscious remembrance of previous lifetimes. So it would have to establish its habits and its perceptions and so on fresh. and it kind of demonstrates the idea of perception or sanya being a learned process. Because a newborn baby doesn't really uh, make sense of its environment at all. It takes at least some days or weeks. I don't know. I don't know what the sequence is, but before it even recognizes um, uh, the face, his mother's face is often the first thing. The eyes of the mother is kind of the first object outside itself that it actually can distinguish. At first, it's just seeing color and shape. It doesn't know face or towel or bed or it just knows color and shape, and it takes some time to make sense of the world. Is extensive practice aimed at reducing time spent in bhavaṅga? Yeah, I think that's a good part of it. I think like if you're doing mindfulness meditation and you're trying to be aware of every single object, then your subsiding into bhavaṅga will be very um, brief, and you'll immediately be re-arising to another object. If you're not mindful, if you're dull, like if you're in a dull state of mind, you're in sloth and torpor, you're constantly spending a lot of time in bhavaṅga and just occasionally breaking out into the process. I don't know if the alaya vinyana is specifically a Mahayana concept, but is any relation to the bhavaṅga? Yeah, very good question. That he's asking about the alaya vinyana, which is a concept of the Yogacara school, the storehouse consciousness. And that article that I cited from Rupert Gethin, that is well worth reading. He actually devotes a few paragraphs to this very point, that he thinks that the alaya vinyana, if might have been a development from the bhavaṅga concept, or possibly they were both independently derived as attempts to explain the continuity within a lifetime and across lifetimes. The alaya vinyana is a bit more elaborated a concept than the bhavaṅga. And I think the criticism from outside their school, the criticism of alaya vinyana, it comes a little bit uncomfortably close to the idea of a self or a soul. So the new bhavaṅga is conditioned by one's whole life, just doesn't show up till the next birth. Yeah, basically that's it. That this lifetime you're experiencing the results of your previous lifetimes, and the most strongest influence is the immediately preceding lifetime. And at the same time you're setting the ground for your next life. And the bhavaṅga that establishes the first of all, the most important thing it establishes is your station of rebirth, whether you're going to be human or animal or dewa. But then it also establishes the individual character of the person, that everybody's bhavaṅga is going to be different. Is it possible to study the Abhidhamma in any of the Sutta Pitakas? No, the Abhidhamma is a separate Pitaka. In the Pali Canon, there are 3 Pitakas: Sutta, Vinaya, and Abhidhamma. The Sutta is the record of the Buddha's discourses. The Vinaya is the rules and procedures for the monks and nuns. And the Abhidhamma is the technical, psychological, metaphysical explanations of how everything works. So next week I want to get into um, Abhidhamma physics, the explanation according to Abhidhamma of how the material world exists. Um, I should warn everybody that it's possible that next week's talk may be delayed. It may not happen on schedule because of my bandwidth limits. Getting towards the end of the month then, and I may not have the bandwidth to do a live stream. But watch for the announcement. If even if I can't do a live stream, I'll put an announcement up with the date, which will be the following Thursday. Yes, Starlink. Yeah, we are looking into getting Starlink. There's apparently a waiting list in our area, but we are getting on it. That may not happen. We are on the waiting list now, I think. Should be, and but we may not have it until the summer. Oh, you're very welcome. Okay, so that's all for this session, and I'll see you. I'll see you when I see you. Hopefully next week, if not the week after. Okay.